the Sky News Australia studios. This is The Outsider's Guide.
Good evening, you're watching The Outsider's Guide to Everything, and we do mean everything. Later on we'll be talking about the day the music died. But first of all, let's give you your Outsider's Guide to when are the Liberals going to grow a spine. Rita Panahi, James Morrow and myself, Rowan Dean, this is The Outsider's Guide to the Liberals. And where is their spine? Rita Panahi, do the Liberals need a spine?
I would say they do. This isn't just something in the age of COVID. We have seen, particularly federally, the coalition, the centre-right parties dominate 7 of the last 9 federal elections they've won. And yet you see that this reluctance to tackle things that are, considered too difficult or outside economic matters. You look at the ABC, for an example. You've had coalition governments for decades just refuse to do anything meaningful about doing something about the bias there. They complain about it, but when they're in power, nothing seems to happen. And of course now with coronavirus and the National Cabinet, the expenditure has been extraordinary. We've seen nothing like it. I would say a lot of that is justified, but there's also been spending that I think has been passed through with very little debate, very little in the way of explanation. And how are we going to pay for it? Our kids are going to be paying for this debt for decades to come. We have got ourselves into such a hole, and there seems to be no relief.
James, we had the situation where Rita's mentioned the coronavirus, but we're going to go broader than that as well. As Rita says, Labor has only won 1 out of the last 9 elections. Of course, 2010 was basically a draw. So the Australian people, James, are basically conservative-leaning people who want conservative governments to do conservative things. Yet time after time, and we saw the success of the Howard years, where the same bloke kept getting re-elected because the Australian people went, yep, we like that. Ever since then, the Liberals have faffed around. They executed Tony Abbott, and he himself made several, I would say, pretty serious mistakes, particularly around coming out and saying that he wouldn't cut the ABC. I mean, why wouldn't you cut the ABC? And also, of course, refusing to get rid of Section 18C. And we are now in a situation where free speech is suffering for the very reasons people like Rita, James and myself all said at the time we need our free speech for when the going gets tough. And it's been taken away from us, and Tony Abbott had that opportunity but squibbed it. And that will forever be a stain there. But since then we've had Turnbull. What a joke that was, the Turnbull government. We then had Scott Morrison, who we've got high hopes on. We pinned high hopes on. But just at the beginning of the coronavirus, James, we had Scott Morrison saying, oh, I don't believe in ideology. Oh, no. There's no red team and blue team anymore. Oh, and here's my mate Sally McManus, and here's my mate Dan Andrews. I mean, give me a break.
Well, look, Rowan, I mean, part of the problem, and I'm going to just sort of go even a little bit further afield than Australia with this answer, part of the problem, I think, is that on the right, there is kind of a desire among a lot of people who go into politics to be liked, and to be liked by the wrong people who will never be actually liking them back. And, probably Malcolm Turnbull was the worst example of this, but we've seen it with leaders on all levels, state, federal. It's really appalling, some of the things we've seen from supposedly centre-right governments, both federally and on state levels around the country. And so many things after 7 years we haven't dealt with. You mentioned 18C, you mentioned the ABC, but our education departments, state and federally, are still being run by complete left-wingers, and we haven't done anything about that. The education minister in New South Wales, supposedly part of a centre-right government, has let the schools in New South Wales just absolutely fall apart. The schools nationally are falling apart, and they're going to be absolutely smashed by COVID and coronavirus. The problem is that there is this desire among some people and commentators to push everybody towards this idea that, well, if there's no red and blue, that everybody just works together and gets along, and then you form a consensus. But the problem is that that consensus rapidly becomes really, really stale. It serves only an elite group, and you wind up, as a result, you know, what happened in the United States, where the Republicans, the Democrats wound up looking so close to one another on so many issues, you know, whether it be foreign policy expansionism and aggression, or government spending, or taxes, or whatever, that it was very hard for people to choose between the two. And that's what creates the circumstances where a Trump can come through and start to clear out some of that mess. And, you know, all of the people who say that here, oh, we don't want any sort of Trumpian sort of American nonsense here. What we want is for a bipartisan fusion party between the coalition and Labor. Well, guys, I'll tell you what you're going to get with that. You're going to get a Trump.
Well, also, and I wish you would get a Trump, but unfortunately before then what we get is a slide into mediocrity. Yes. Now, Rita, it's not as if any of these things weren't warned about. Way back in the Howard years, Kevin Donnelly was warning about what would happen to our education standards, which were then way up there, when he looked at the curriculum and he could see what was coming down the track was all this left-wing garbage. The Howard government did nothing about it. The Abbott government did nothing about it. The Turnbull government probably loved it all, and the Morrison government's done nothing about it. We now find ourselves with lower academic standards than Kazakhstan. We now find our kids riven with this climate change, same-sex gender stuff, trans stuff, all this garbage, which is fine for them to learn, except they're learning it at the expense of the things they need to know, such as maths and reading and writing and grammar and so on. So it was warned about, but the Liberal Party never did anything about it. Same with climate change. We were warned that energy prices would go up and up and up, and yet the Liberal Party did the same thing, Rita. They stayed in there, oh no, and they're still there. Oh, let's sign the Paris Agreement. Oh, let's put up energy prices. Oh, we're lovies, you know, to win 1 or 2 seats, which, you know, they scraped into, whereas the rest of the country is going, please come and look after us, Liberal Party, and they're ignoring that, and it's up to the Nationals, you would think, half the time to actually carry the load. Rita, what's the thing that most aggravates or disappoints you about this Liberal Party?
Well, yeah, it's that lack of principle, lack of courage, the backbone to fight for a position that their constituents want them to fight for. And when James was talking about consensus politics, trust me, whenever the media's cheering on consensus politics, you can be sure it's a left-wing policy. It's never consensus conservative policies. But the left, regardless of how many elections the centre-right wins, and this is true for both Australia, the UK, the US, the left continue their march through the institutions. They have captured every public institutions, and now they have increasingly have a presence and a dominance in private institutions. You only have to look at the corporate virtue signalling on everything from Black Lives Matter to same-sex marriage and all sorts of other political positions that the corporations are taking. So that's what happens when you don't fight the so-called culture wars. Just because you don't acknowledge them or fight them doesn't mean the left isn't fighting like hell and making enormous ground. And that's why Conservatives need to wake up. You can't pretend this stuff is just nonsense that exists on social media or at university campuses. It has seeped into every level of society. It polices our language. It polices how we think or what we can reasonably say. And people self-censor now. Even everyday people who on their own Facebook page are reluctant to share a political position in case they get cancelled by their friends.
James, every time we see slight glimmers, little glimpses of a flickering of flame, of conservative flame anywhere within the Liberal Party, it seems to get stamped out. We've seen the Wolverines, so that's the group of Andrew Hastie, James Patterson and others who are kind of standing up for China. On climate change, you have people like Craig Kelly, you have Amanda Stoker, Alex Antich, who we had on the show. There are some good people there. In the Nats, there are some good people like Matt Canavan, who really really put the Liberal Party to shame with their strong understanding of the value of conservative ideas and conservative ideology. But they're always in the minority, and we have this idea from head office. The Liberal president, former Liberal, I don't know if he still is, Scott Ryan, was the one who said, oh, no, stop lecturing us about being conservatives. We're just basically in it to chase the votes. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But is this what the end game is? They just do anything to appeal to the focus groups and the research groups, and without actually knowing what they stand for.
I mean, part of it is that, you know, there's a sort of moderate faction within the Libs, and particularly in states like New South Wales, which are devoted to spending far more time voting against conservatives and driving conservatives out of the Liberal Party and out of the coalition than they are against fighting people like the Greens, who I would argue are their spiritual cousins. So you have this sort of group within the Liberals, these moderates, who are philosophically and in some cases economically, because there's a lot of, you know, rent-seeking that goes on with renewables and things like this, tied to the Greens, or philosophically related to the Greens, and they're culturally and class-wise aligned to the Greens. You know, they're often very high income, and they look down on the concerns of conservative people or religious people as just kind of stupid and bigoted, and what they think is that everybody should be, as they like to put it, you know, economically conservative and socially liberal. But if you actually drill down into what people really think, and here's where the real opportunity is that people are actually far more socially conservative generally, and this keeps holding true. Look at the last election. All of these Western Sydney seats that went for Morrison because they couldn't stand the far-left social engineering of Labor, when Labor had thought, oh, well, you know, these are migrant seats, these will come over to us. No, they all came home to Scott Morrison. And yet people also, we see right now, you know, they do not want to be left to an entirely laissez-faire economy, especially internationally around trade deals. And I think Trump has figured that out. I don't think our supposedly putative conservatives here in Australia have. They need to, and they need to do something again about that moderate wing in the party, which sounds all very, you know, fluffy. Who could be against a moderate, right, Rowan? And yet they are winding up dragging the whole party to this shipwreck with their philosophical ties to the Greens.
Absolutely. We've got to leave it there. Sorry, Rita. Sorry, Rita. We've got to leave it there. We've got to crack on. Coming up, ever listen to any of the music your kids or grandkids are listening to? Remember when Don McLean said, the day the music died? I think we've gone well past that. Outsider's Guide to the Day the Music Died. In a tick.